CCC is very happy today to welcome teachers and school administrators from across the United States, as well as curriculum developers, custom publishers, and top influencers at leading education technology companies. Over the next half hour, and leaving time for your questions, my colleagues and I will outline a new solution for incorporating excerpts of high-quality content in K-12 curriculum, products, and services. Whether instruction happens in physical spaces or online, teachers today use an array of approaches that require access to and delivery of high-quality content from leading book, magazine, and news publishers. With the annual copyright license for curriculum and instruction now available from CCC, U.S. schools, education technology companies, custom publishers, and curriculum developers can incorporate these important content excerpts into their latest curriculum materials. The annual copyright license for curriculum and instruction helps remove copyright-related barriers to use of key instructional materials. The repertory license eases the burden of obtaining individual licenses from individual publishers. And for remote instruction, the annual copyright license for curriculum and instruction provides a well-defined, flexible set of rights that supports virtual instruction. Joining me on this webcast are Tim Bowen, Senior Director of Information and Content Solutions for CCC. Welcome, Tim.
Thank you, Chris, and hello, everyone.
As well as Roy Kaufman, Managing Director of Business Development. Welcome to you as well, Roy.
Thank you, Chris. Glad to be here.
Well, we're glad you can join us. And Roy, I want to start with you because you've worked for many years with our CCC colleagues on developing licensing solutions serving the K-12 marketplace. And when the pandemic closed classrooms across the country in March 2020, for example, CCC offered a no-fee educational continuity license that authorized educators across the U.S. to use publisher materials in distance learning models. And obviously that was very important and timely. So why did CCC develop this new K-12 licensing solution for curriculum and instruction?
So CCC, we've been around since 1978, and historically we're sort of known for our higher education and corporate licensing initiatives. About 8 or 9 years ago, we started to get involved in K-12, and this was driven in large part by new educational standards. There was the Common Core State Standard of College and Career Readiness, and then Common Core sort of fell apart a little bit in some states, but was replaced by very similar state standards all around college and career readiness. And for English language arts, the requirement was that students would be given access to, and this could be in assessment or in curriculum, high quality complex texts in excerpts forms, and it should be authentic as opposed to what's known as synthetic. So synthetic, think of that as content created for the classroom, whereas authentic is the kind of thing you'd see in your college or in your career, newspapers, books, chapters. So there was a need for excerpts, and we were approached by a multi-state consortium building a very large adaptive assessment called Smarter Balanced, and they needed a lot of content in a very short time frame, and the traditional linear permission on an individual basis just wasn't going to work for them. So we created a collective license at scale. And then that license has been wildly successful. And we went then and started talking to educational leaders, tell them about this great work we did. And they rightly chastised us and said, well, what are you doing in the classroom? So we started moving forward to saying, how are we going to help in the classroom? How are we going to have the same content types in the classroom that you have on assessment? Because that's really fair. And first, we started working with some OER providers, particularly state of Louisiana. We have a partner in Xanadu. We were helping the state of Louisiana take their open educational curriculum and then attach copyrighted material with permission. We did something similar with Washington, D.C., which wasn't open curriculum, but it was local DEI, something that spoke to their students. But that was all transactional, and so it couldn't really scale. Then we began looking at, well, what are we going to do that's a little bit bigger and a little bit more flexible? We, with actually Tim, created a pilot for ed tech. We got about 30 publishers to join. We got a couple customers to talk to us. And that was well and good until the pandemic hit. As you mentioned, we put together this education continuity license. We did that in a matter of weeks. That was just a patch. That was just, how do we get through the first 6 months or what have you of this crisis? And then we expedited what we were doing with the EdTech pilot and said, okay, we don't know where the students are, and we don't know who's bringing the curriculum to them. This could be education technology, it could be a district. How are we going to build a big flexible license? And that's where we are today.
All right. So Roy, along the way, we've learned a lot about the impact of including published content in a variety of ways. And now with this focus on K-12 curriculum, what do we know about the importance of this type of content?
It's key. As I said, we're licensing content for high stakes assessment in almost all of the states. And there's a huge equity issue that the students, when they're in the classroom, should be looking at the same types of content, same complexity, same publishers as they're going to be exposed to when they take that high stakes assessment. So that was one of the big things we learned. Other things we learned are, not shockingly, people want content that's adaptable and that's of interest to an individual student. So that might be material about their home state or their home city. It might be material published by authors who look like them. It might be diverse, and you have to be careful that when you're talking about diverse content, means for a Pacific Islander, it might be slightly different from, if you're looking at, let's say, Native American literature, it's different from Pacific Islands and Great Plains states. So you have to have all of this content, and you have to make it flexible, and you have to enable students to really be able to engage and meet them where they are.
And that's what teachers are looking for these days, right? They're trying to meet the needs and interests of all the students in their classrooms.
Absolutely. A couple of the big buzzwords that we've been hearing, not just this year, but for a few years, are personalized and adaptive. And a great teacher will tell you all education is personalized. Every student has different interests and different needs. Adaptive, though, that's really coming with new technology systems, with AI and machine learning, where the machine can give a student access to content, let's say on assessment or in the classroom, and they'll read that content and the machine will say, oh, that was too easy for the student. Let me give them a more complex text. Oh, that student seemed to struggle with vocabulary. Let me go back a level, but on the vocabulary side. Or this student was great on this, but on vocabulary, but struggled with sequencing. So let's give them a sequencing passage. And it's great that we have all of these tools that are available to students and educators. But again, we sort of have to match up the content so that there's a good pool of content, something called an item bank, where you have to feed the machine with all these different options, that the content is diverse in a lot of different ways, that the content speaks to the students, that it can be localized, and it could be at the right level. And it could be everything from kindergarten level books to high level newspaper articles and everything in between.
Well, what I like, Roy, about this is the meeting of content and technology, particularly with the adaptive learning process. But if EdTech companies, curriculum developers are looking for this type of content, they could just deal directly with individual publishers. Why come to CCC to secure these kind of permissions?
Well, first of all, CCC is always happy if people go to individual publishers, but the challenge is in the timing and the scale. So typically, if you want permission to use a specific passage from a publisher, you write to that publisher and they have questions, and then you go back and forth. In the best case scenario, that takes a few weeks or a month. Worst case scenario, that could take a lot longer. And in the meantime, you need to develop lesson plans. You need to develop content around that passage. The passage isn't the end, it's the beginning. And it's much better to know in advance, I can use this passage and it's worth investing my teacher's time to create materials around it. So that's one of the big things. And I think I'll stop there. That's a huge thing, this sort of alignment and pre-approval. There are other advantages, and I'll do one more, which is cost certainty. When you go through that process, you don't know what the publishers are going to charge you, and they might charge fair amounts. They typically do, but that's an unknown. And now you're investing money, and now you're more stuck with that content, particularly if you've put a lot of content around it. Whereas with our license, you know exactly what it's going to cost you for the year. Tim will, I think, get into some of the details of it. But you have absolute cost certainty, absolute rights certainty, and you don't have what we sometimes refer to as the Swiss cheese, which is every time you get a license from a publisher, it'll have specific terms, and then you have to line them all up and say, wait, do I have this? Is this a 3-year license or a 5-year license? Did this give me digital or not? Can I have a student read from this passage and record it? All of these questions that are, everyone operating in good faith, you're going to end up with a big pile of paper and a whole lot of questions about how they interact with each other.
Right. And certainly in a world of uncertainty, it is good to know that there's something consistent there. And that's what the license really does offer these curriculum developers. And as you say, we'll hear about it more from Tim Bowen in just a moment. But first, thanks very much, Roy Kaufman. I appreciate the background on the development of this license. And now I want to turn to you, Tim Bowen, and talk about some of the particulars of it to better understand the benefits that we're offering to people. And I suppose we should start by talking about this term collective licensing solution. That may be for some in the audience a somewhat novel idea. How does a collective repertory license work?
Yeah, so Chris, a collective license is probably a novel idea to a lot of our listeners, but to CCC, we've been doing collective licensing, or what we call repertory style licensing, for over 35 years, with thousands of corporations and academic institutions of higher education and assessment developers that are using a collective license through CCC. And it's really the most, as Roy was talking about, the most efficient way in order to obtain reuse rights to reuse and republish content. What we do is we go out to a select number of publishers out there, depending on what the market needs are. It could be several hundred, several thousand, and we work with them to sign agreements to be able to reuse their portions of their works in this collective license. We create this collective license and we offer it to the market. In this case, it's, as you were saying, Chris, curriculum developers, ed tech companies, custom publishers. It can even be a school district or a state DOE. And we will sell them this license, again, allowing them to reuse copyrighted content from our participating publishers in instruction, curriculum, in their products and services that they offer in the K-12 market. We then onboard them, tell them, how to use the license, how to verify coverage, because you have to verify coverage to ensure that, if you find a piece of content from one of our participating publishers, you need to go to our online tool, verify how that, if it is covered, and if it is, you can go ahead and use that content for the duration of your license. And at the end of the term, we'll ask them to provide us with usage reporting. And we'll use that usage reporting to pay the participating publishers for their content that was used by our licensees as appropriate based on the usage reporting we get.
Right. And that I'm sorry, Tim.
And from a benefits perspective, one of the great things about this license is that what provides is check and go permissions. That's our little saying we call here, because basically for a licensee, they don't have to go and work with a publisher, as Roy was talking about, and sign various agreements and negotiate terms and pay them different fees and, with the Swiss cheese rights and all that stuff. It's a single set of reuse rights. And they basically just go to our online tool, find the content they want to use, verify it, and then go and use it. Check and go permissions.
Well, and the offer of training, I was going to say, Tim, is a reassuring one. And it's training that's based in the experience that CCC has had over a number of years working with people in ed tech and educators. So we anticipate in a fashion what it is they're going to need and the questions they may have. That's really important. So they can begin to really use this license almost right away.
And get the full value out of their license. Exactly, Chris.
Right. Well, we're talking about questions. I want to remind our audience that if there's a question you have for Tim or for Roy, please use the chat box there. Let us know what's on your mind. If it is for one particular person, let us know who it's addressed to. But we'll take as many of those in just a few minutes. But Tim Bowen, I want to talk about the benefits from the annual copyright license for curriculum and instruction. We've been talking about reuse. We should tell people a little more specifically about some of the reuses. What types of use and reuse does this new license cover? And there are some that we wouldn't have thought about even a year ago, but now they're on that list. Tell us.
You're absolutely right, Chris. So again, we developed this for and with ed tech companies and curriculum developers and others. We've actually been developing this license for over 3 years. So we've done a lot of research. As Roy pointed out, we did a nice year-long pilot program with an ed tech company, and we learned a lot, Chris. The license covers the reuse of portions of copyrighted content in ed tech applications. You want to embed, again, copyrighted content in your ed tech application, in a learning management system, in core curriculum products, in supplemental curriculum materials, in professional development for teachers, as well as for both remote and in-person instruction. And what we learned in that pilot program was the need for ReadAloud rights, which we didn't have in the pilot program, but we do have in the commercial license that we are now offering, which is something that's very much needed due to the pandemic, as well as a lot of ed tech applications require ReadAloud rights.
And that ReadAloud, right? I just want to ask you to tell us a little bit more about that, because I find it fascinating. It would not be something you would immediately suspect, particularly as you're developing curriculum, but it's of real value for young students and for older ones.
Sure. So some of the applications out there from the ed tech companies we work with, they require either the teacher to actually read a piece of copyrighted content for the students to listen to, or they'll do that reading and or recording of that for the students to listen to. And then conversely, some of the applications out there require the student to read a passage of copyrighted content. So again, the teacher can see how well they're progressing in their reading skills. In remote times of remote and distance learning, remote education, I'd say, teachers have to read aloud over the web, remote instruction all the time. So, this and all these other benefits of license really adds value to the licensee's products. So, these ed tech companies and curriculum developers who have products that they offer in the K-12 space, adding copyrighted content to those products and services actually adds value to their services, makes them better, and increases customer satisfaction. One of our ed tech licensees said, their customer said, "We love your product. We hate the content you're making our kids read. It's dusty old, overly used public domain content, or as Roy was saying earlier, synthetic content that they wrote themselves." Again, this gives them the opportunity to include high quality published content in their products and services.
Right. And to sort of hit on that point about the type of content, we'll tell people in just a moment about some of the publishers, and some of them are really unexpected, but really of value to our audience here. But one of the pilot participants made a point that I saw, Tim, to talk about not just access to content, but equitable access. That's really important to quality education in public schools around this country. Equitable access to content that is diverse, that is representative, that is the kind of content where the kids can see themselves.
Yeah, so in our research, we found just that schools are looking to use content that publishers have produced that are in the DEI space or local cultural content. So we were speaking to the DOE in Colorado, and they said we want to be teaching our kids about Native American content, which is not in the big curriculum products, or not enough. We want to expand upon that teaching to our kids. So we've gone after publishers that offer DEI content, such as Just Us Books and Jump with a exclamation point. Roman and Littlefield has some wonderful DI content. And we actually have all the transcripts, or the majority of the transcripts from NPR, which Chris, is really high quality local content. Really nice stuff.
And when you get to NPR, it really is diverse because it's covering everyone at every level in every state. And I think that's really important. So a question I'm sure that the audience is asking themselves is, we're focused on the rights and the permissions here, but does the license include the content?
It does not. So, currently we have about 30 publishers in the license, which equates to right now just under 100,000 titles. And we're adding new publishers every week, and we're having some really good success in doing so. Publishers are actually anxious to join this license, so it's been very well received in the publishing market. I think we'll probably have those numbers doubled in the next 6 months. But we're going after content like, works like, trade books, fiction, nonfiction. We're going after things like children's serials, newspapers, web content, but we don't have the content itself. What we have are the reuse rights. So right now, our listeners, when they find some content they want to use, they're going and knocking on the door at different publishers and signing reuse agreements with them and negotiating pricing and all that stuff for them. We take that part out of the equation, and we actually handle, again, this has the reuse rights for the use of that content, not the content itself. That said, every publisher we sign, we ask them, do you have a digital asset library that we can offer free access to our licensees, so they can actually go to and search and discover content from your database, so that they can use that in their product services under the license. So not all of our publishers have that, but a lot of them have a digital asset library that they can have, again, free access to find content, and then they just verify that if it's covered under the license, and again, check and go and use that content. So it's a really...
Well, I suspect... I'm sorry, Tim. Yeah, please finish.
So it's a really nice mechanism, a really efficient mechanism, whereby you can find content very quickly, verify the reuse rights in seconds, and then go and use that content for the term of your agreement.
Right. Another question I'm sure curriculum developers are thinking about is, well, how much of this can I use? Is it simply excerpts? Again, we've used that word in our presentation today. Is it possible to use an entire work?
You can't use an entire work. What we say in the agreement basically is you can use portions or excerpts of works. Now, that said, an article, magazine article, you're going to be able to use, or a newspaper article, you can use the whole magazine article, the whole newspaper article, of course, right? When we're talking about books here, it's portions of books. Sometimes the publisher specifies what percent can be used, some don't. I can tell you, usually the ones that do specify amount, they're pretty liberal. Say, you can use 20 to 25% of the work, which, if you talk about a book here, that's pretty substantial.
Right. And one last quick question I think we have to ask on behalf of the audience, Tim, before we get to their questions is, well, how do we charge for the license? It's important for people to understand the way that the pricing mechanism works.
Yeah, it's pretty simple, Chris. We actually charge by the number of students that see copyrighted content under the license. So when they decide to adopt the license, we'll send them an agreement. We'll ask them, how many students do you think will see copyrighted content in your product that's covered under this license? They give us that number, and then we'll bill them on, again, a charge per student. At the end of their term, we'll go back to them and say, we'll true up those numbers just to make sure, did you go over that number? If they're within 10%, all good. Let's move on. If they did exceed over 10%, then we'll bill them for the overage. No big deal. Quick and easy.
All right. Well, Tim Bowen, thanks for the answers to those pretty important questions. And now we want to go to the questions from our audience. We do have a few in the chat. If you've got a question for Tim Bowen or for Roy Kaufman, use that chat box and let us know what's on your mind. But as people tee up the questions, I want to ask you both, and Roy, start with you. We've been working on this license for over a year with the pilot that you told us about. What's next? What kinds of things can we expect to see develop as the license progresses throughout the school year?
I think one of the key things was already touched on by Tim, which is we went out, we weren't sure how publishers were going to react to this license. Frankly, that's the way everything we do at CCC. We're never quite sure what the publishers are going to think. We go to them. This is a very large ask of the publishers. So when publishers at Rosen Publishers sign in to us as they have, it's a big level of trust. They're trusting us to approach a market in a way and make sure that their interests are protected. So we were nervous. We went out. We had a great response. And the number one response for our company is when the people who are signing the publishers say, "That was great. Give us more publishers to sign." That's what happened. So it's really, our phrase for that is inventory. So the number one thing that I'm focusing on is inventory. And a lot of that comes from, we think we know what publishers we want to sign in. Frankly, we look at who's on the assessments and who's being used because we do want to hit that equity point and make sure that there's a match between those. And we've been in the assessment business a long time, so there's hundreds more publishers in the assessment product. The other thing, and I'm going to turn this over to Tim because this is, his problem more than mine, is just improving the lookup tools, improving all of those, the user experience. And again, it's a new license, so there's a lot of process improvement that comes on board very quickly and starts to ramp. So I'm going to turn it over.
Right, I was going to say, so Tim Bowen, it's about the customer experience that you're really working on.
It is. It's the customer experience and their workflow and making that efficient as possible for them. Again, they search for content. They need to discover content based on their particular content needs. Trying to make that easy by getting as many publishers that participate in the license to, again, provide free access to their digital asset library. So again, the adoptees can find content. And as Roy talked about, those online tools that allow you to quickly verify coverage of that content under the license. We have that as well. We're just finishing up. That's a product called Right Find Curriculum, where you'll verify coverage on the license. And there's also types of help tools in there as well. And then being able to use that content quickly in their products and services.
Well, here's an interesting question from Gayatri, who is an editor at an academic publishing house in India. And she wants to know whether these licenses apply only to developers and companies in the United States. Is that the case, Roy Kaufman?
It's not the case. So it's worth having a conversation. So when we acquire the rights from publishers, we try to acquire a consistent set of rights. Mm-hmm. With certain things in this license, they have to be consistent, and we can't negotiate because we need the user experience to be consistent. One of the places that can be a challenge is particularly with trade books, where the publisher may only have US rights. And so there might be, with some of our publishers, limitations, and with other publishers, there are no limitations. Associated Press has global rights. We have no problem licensing those rights globally. So it would probably be worthwhile is having a conversation with us about, and we can follow up with you afterwards, to take a look at our inventory. There, again, I hate to say this, but it's just the truth. There are some publishers who couldn't give us global rights, but we are open to, where we have global rights, we're certainly open to entering into global licenses because that's what publishers have asked us to do.
Well, that's really interesting. So I didn't realize that, and I appreciate the answer there, Roy Kaufman. We have a question from Whitney, who wants to know about how usage is tracked if the content is not part of the license. Tim?
Well, we don't care, to be honest with you, Chris. So if you're using content that's not under the license, if you went direct and got permission directly from a particular publisher that's not in this license, that's something you've dealt with on your own. If, again, you use the license and you're using content from one of our 30 publishers that are in the license, we will ask you to provide usage reporting, very basic usage reporting at the end of your term of your license. And that includes things like maybe the grade level, the number of students who viewed the content and things like that. Really easy reporting.
All right. Well, I want to thank our guest today. That was Tim Bowen, Senior Director, Information and Content Services at CCC, as well as Roy Kaufman, Managing Director of Business Development. It's been very interesting to learn about a new solution for incorporating excerpts of high-quality content in K-12 curriculum, products, and services. We appreciate your joining us. We appreciate your questions. And want to let you know that you should look for an email from CCC's Andrew Campana, who was on the team that developed this license. All attendees will receive a webcast recording, and you're invited to share it with your colleagues. Andrew, we'd love to hear from you if you have any questions or suggestions, as Roy says, and as Tim makes the point as well. We're always listening to the customers and want to be as responsive as we can be. But that's the end of the program. That's all we have time for right now. Look for that email from Andrew Campana. And for Haley Sund, our program director, and myself, Chris Keneally, and everyone on the CCC team, bye for now.